The small town of Pinewood had always been a place where everyone knew each other's business. It was a town with deep roots, where old families held on to their land and their prejudices just as tightly as they did their traditions. The Carson family had lived in Pinewood for over a decade, renting a modest two-bedroom house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was home. Marcus Carson, a truck driver by trade, had worked tirelessly to provide for his family. His wife, Angela, balanced her time between raising their two children, Jamal and Kayla, and working part-time at the local diner. Life wasn't easy, but they managed to get by, always paying their rent on time and keeping to themselves. Their landlord, Mr. Donald Hayes, had inherited several properties in town from his father. The Hayes family had been in Pinewood for generations, and they were known for their wealth and their disdain for anyone who wasn't like them. Hayes had always made it clear that he didn't particularly like renting to black families, but he had kept the Carsons as tenants because they never caused trouble and always paid on time. Still, his distaste was evident in the way he spoke to them, his words laced with condescension and barely concealed hostility. One afternoon, as Marcus was returning home from a long haul, he noticed a sleek black car parked outside the Hayes' grand estate. The sight of the car, with its out-of-town plates, piqued his curiosity, but he pushed it out of his mind as he pulled into his own driveway. He had more pressing matters to attend to, like spending time with his family after being on the road for days. Inside the Carson home, the smell of Angela's famous fried chicken wafted through the air, and the sound of Jamal and Kayla's laughter filled the small living room. Marcus smiled as he walked through the front door, the weight of the world momentarily lifted by the warmth of his family. "Daddy's home!" Kayla shouted, rushing to greet him with a hug. "Hey, baby girl," Marcus said, scooping her up into his arms. "How's my little princess?" "Good. We were just about to eat. Mama made your favorite," she replied with a grin. Angela appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Welcome home, honey," she said, her voice soft and loving. "Good to be home," Marcus replied, setting Kayla down and walking over to his wife. He kissed her on the cheek and took a deep breath, savoring the familiar scent of home-cooked food. "Smells amazing, as always." "Go wash up. Dinner's almost ready," Angela said, gently nudging him toward the bathroom. As they sat down to dinner, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He hadn't mentioned the black car to Angela, but the image of it lingered in his mind. It wasn't until later that night, as they were getting ready for bed, that he finally brought it up. "Angie," he began, "you see that car parked outside Mr. Hayes' place today?" Angela looked up from her side of the bed, her brow furrowed. "No, I didn't. Why?" "Just something about it didn't sit right with me," Marcus said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It was one of those fancy cars, looked like it was from out of town. Don't see many of those around here." Angela sighed and shook her head. "You know how Mr. Hayes is, probably just some business deal or something. Don't let it get to you." Marcus nodded, but the unease remained. "Yeah, you're probably right. Just felt off is all." A few days later, Marcus and Angela received a letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Hayes, and it was addressed to them both. The letter was short, but its contents sent a chill down their spines. "Due to numerous violations of your lease agreement, you are hereby fined $500. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in further action, including but not limited to eviction proceedings." Marcus stared at the letter in disbelief. "Violations? What the hell is he talking about?" Angela took the letter from his hands and read it over. "This has to be some kind of mistake. We've never violated anything." "I'm going over there," Marcus said, grabbing his jacket. "Wait," Angela said, grabbing his arm. "Don't do anything rash. Let's think this through." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger that was boiling inside him. "Fine, but we're not paying a dime until we get to the bottom of this." The next morning, Marcus called Mr. Hayes, but his calls went straight to voicemail. He tried again later in the day, but still no answer. Frustrated, he decided to go to Mr. Hayes' office in town, but when he arrived, the office was closed. It wasn't until he was walking back to his truck that he saw Mr. Hayes across the street, talking to the same man he had seen in the black car a few days earlier. "Mr. Hayes!" Marcus called out, crossing the street. Mr. Hayes looked up, his expression turning sour as he recognized Marcus. "What do you want, Carson?" "I want to know what this letter is all about," Marcus said, holding up the notice. "We haven't violated anything." Mr. Hayes glanced at the letter, then turned back to the man he was speaking with. "I'm busy right now. If you have an issue, take it up with my lawyer." "This is bullshit, and you know it," Marcus shouted, his frustration boiling over. The man in the black car stepped forward, placing a hand on Mr. Hayes' shoulder. "Is there a problem here, Don?" "No problem," Mr. Hayes said, his voice cold. "Just a tenant who doesn't know his place." Marcus clenched his fists, but before he could say anything else, the man in the black car spoke up. "I suggest you leave before this gets any worse for you." Marcus glared at the two men, but he knew he was outnumbered. He turned and walked back to his truck, his mind racing with anger and confusion. What was Mr. Hayes playing at? Over the next few weeks, the situation only worsened. Mr. Hayes began issuing more fines, each one more outrageous than the last. He claimed that the Carsons had damaged the property, that they had too many people living in the house, and that they had failed to maintain the yard. None of it was true, but Mr. Hayes didn't care. He was building a case, one that he hoped would force the Carsons out. Angela tried to reason with him, but her calls were ignored. When Marcus went to his office again, he found the door locked and a "for sale" sign in the window. It was clear that Mr. Hayes was planning to sell the property, but he wanted the Carsons gone before he did. One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, there was a knock at the door. Marcus answered it to find a man in a suit standing on the porch, a briefcase in hand. "Good evening," the man said, flashing a thin smile. "I'm here to serve you with this notice." He handed Marcus a stack of papers, then turned and walked away without another word. Marcus looked down at the papers, his heart sinking as he realized what they were. "Marcus, what is it?" Angela asked, coming to the door. Marcus handed her the papers, his hands shaking with anger. "It's an eviction notice." Angela's eyes widened as she read through the notice. "This can't be happening. We've done everything right. We've paid our rent on time. We've kept the place up." "He doesn't care," Marcus said, his voice filled with bitterness. "He just wants us out so he can sell the place." Angela shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "What are we going to do, Marcus? We can't afford to move right now." Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as she began to cry. "We'll fight this, Angie. We're not going to let him push us out." But even as he said the words, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. They were up against a man with money, power, and connections, and they had none of those things. The next few weeks were a blur of stress and uncertainty for the Carsons. They tried to find a lawyer who would take their case, but most of them either demanded fees they couldn't afford or refused to go up against Mr. Hayes, who had a reputation for being ruthless in court. Desperation began to set in as the eviction date loomed closer. One evening, as Marcus was flipping through the phone book, he came across an ad for a local law firm that offered pro bono services for low-income families. The ad featured a picture of a young black woman named Maya Turner, who specialized in tenant rights cases. With nothing left to lose, Marcus dialed the number. "Turner Law Offices, how can I help you?" a woman's voice answered. "Yes, I'd like to speak to Maya Turner, please," Marcus said, his voice filled with hope. "One moment, please," the woman replied. After a few moments, a new voice came on the line. "This is Maya Turner. How can I help you?" Marcus took a deep breath and began to explain the situation, detailing the harassment and false accusations that Mr. Hayes had been throwing at them. As he spoke, he could feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting off his shoulders. "That sounds like a tough situation, Mr. Carson," Maya said after he finished. "But it also sounds like you've got a strong case. I'd like to help you if you're willing." Marcus felt a surge of relief. "We'd be grateful for any help you can give us, Miss Turner." "Call me Maya," she replied. "I'll need to gather some more information, but I'm confident we can fight this. I'll see you tomorrow morning at my office, and we'll go over everything together." "Thank you, Maya," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to us." The next morning, Marcus and Angela met with Maya at her small office in the center of town. Maya was young, but her confidence and determination were palpable. She listened intently as Marcus and Angela recounted their experiences, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions. "It's clear to me that Mr. Hayes is trying to force you out so he can sell the property," Maya said, her tone serious. "But what he's doing is illegal. Eviction proceedings can't be based on false claims or fabricated violations. We'll need to gather evidence to prove that you've been in compliance with your lease and that Mr. Hayes is acting in bad faith." "What kind of evidence do we need?" Angela asked, her voice wavering. "Everything you can find," Maya replied. "Copies of your lease, records of your rent payments, any correspondence with Mr. Hayes, and if possible, testimonies from other tenants who have had similar experiences with him." Marcus nodded. "We'll get everything we can." Over the next few days, Marcus and Angela worked tirelessly to gather all the evidence they could find. They dug through old files, collected bank statements, and reached out to neighbors who had also been tenants of Mr. Hayes. Some were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation, but others were more than willing to share their stories. One evening, as Marcus was going through the stack of papers they had collected, Jamal walked into the living room. "Dad, can I talk to you for a minute?" Marcus looked up, surprised by the serious tone in his son's voice. "Sure, son. What's on your mind?" Jamal hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the couch next to his father. "I've been thinking about everything that's been going on, and I want to help. I know I'm just a kid, but this isn't right. What Mr. Hayes is doing isn't right." Marcus felt a swell of pride as he looked at his son. "You're not just a kid, Jamal. You're a part of this family, and your voice matters. We're going to fight this together." Jamal nodded, his resolve firm. "I want to make sure no one else has to go through this. It's not just about us, it's about everyone Mr. Hayes has hurt." The day of the court hearing arrived, and the Carsons walked into the courtroom with Maya by their side. The tension in the air was palpable as they took their seats, and Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Across the room, Mr. Hayes sat with his lawyer, a smug expression on his face. The proceedings began, and Mr. Hayes' lawyer wasted no time in trying to paint the Carsons as irresponsible tenants who had repeatedly violated their lease. He presented the fines and violations as evidence, but Maya was quick to challenge them. "Your Honor," Maya said, standing up to address the judge, "the fines and violations that Mr. Hayes is presenting are baseless. My clients have maintained their property, paid their rent on time, and have been nothing but responsible tenants. What we are dealing with here is a case of targeted harassment and discrimination." The judge looked over the evidence that Maya had submitted, his expression growing more serious as he read through the documents. "Ms. Turner, do you have any additional evidence to support your claim?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied. "We have testimony from other tenants who have experienced similar harassment from Mr. Hayes, as well as proof that the alleged violations were fabricated." One by one, former tenants of Mr. Hayes took the stand, recounting their experiences of being fined for non-existent violations and threatened with eviction. Their testimonies painted a clear picture of a pattern of discrimination and abuse of power. Finally, it was Marcus's turn to take the stand. As he spoke, he felt a mixture of anger and determination. "We've lived in that house for over 10 years, Your Honor. We've raised our kids there. We've made it our home. But ever since Mr. Hayes started getting these offers from developers, he's been trying to push us out. We've done nothing wrong, but he doesn't care. He just wants us gone so he can make a quick buck." The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When Marcus finished, Maya presented the final piece of evidence, a recording of a conversation between Mr. Hayes and the real estate developer, in which they discussed their plan to force the Carsons out in order to sell the property. The courtroom fell silent as the recording played, Mr. Hayes' voice dripping with contempt as he talked about the problem tenants he needed to get rid of. When the recording ended, the judge turned to Mr. Hayes, his face stern. "Mr. Hayes, it is clear to me that you have been acting in bad faith. Your actions constitute harassment and discrimination, and I find your behavior to be reprehensible. The eviction proceedings are hereby dismissed, and I am ordering you to pay damages to the Carsons for the undue stress and hardship you have caused them." A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom as the judge delivered his verdict. Marcus and Angela exchanged relieved smiles, tears of joy welling up in their eyes. Mr. Hayes's face turned red with anger, but he knew better than to protest. The damage was done, and his reputation was shattered. As the Carsons left the courthouse, they were greeted by a group of supporters from their community who had gathered outside to show their solidarity. Among them was Maya, who smiled as she approached the family. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. "No, we did it," Marcus replied, shaking her hand. "We couldn't have done this without you, Maya. Thank you." Maya nodded, her expression serious. "This is just the beginning. There are more people out there who need help, and we need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Angela placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're right, and we're going to be right there with you, fighting for what's right." In the weeks that followed, the Carsons became more involved in their community, joining forces with Maya and other activists to fight against housing discrimination and tenant abuse. They shared their story with others, hoping to inspire change and empower those who felt powerless. For Marcus and Angela, the ordeal had been a wake-up call. It had shown them the importance of standing up for themselves and for others, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It had also brought them closer as a family, strengthening their bond and deepening their resolve to create a better future for their children. As they sat on their porch one evening, watching the sun set over Pinewood, Marcus turned to Angela and took her hand. "We've been through a lot, but we made it through, and we're stronger because of it." Angela smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Yes, we are, and we're going to keep fighting for us, for our kids, and for everyone who needs a voice." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. They had won this battle, but the fight for justice was far from over. But with their family by their side and the support of their community, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would continue to stand up against injustice, to fight for what was right, and to build a future where everyone had a place to call home.